Just a warning, this episode of No Filter discusses sexual assault and consent. Hi, I'm Mia Friedman, and this is No Filter. Vanessa Grigoriadis has spent years thinking a lot about consent. It's not a word many of us grew up thinking about if you're, say, over 30 or over 35, but it's never been more at the forefront of public debate about sex than it is right now. Vanessa is a journalist and author whose interest in consent was sparked by an interview she did with a young American college student who's been dubbed Mattress Girl. You may have heard of her. Mattress Girl got her name after she began carrying, well, her mattress, around her college campus to protest the way that she says the college handled her complaint that she was raped by another student while they were on a date. He denies it. She agrees that part of the sex was consensual, and it's complicated, and that's the point. While consent can be incredibly black and white, like the case of another American college student, Brock Turner, who was convicted and jailed for raping a young woman who was passed out drunk at a party, there are other times when it's not, where the lines are blurred and one person believes consent was given and the other person doesn't. Can both things be true? That's what Vanessa seeks to find out in her book called Blurred Lines, Rethinking Sex, Power and Consent on Campus. Now, we recorded this conversation before the Me Too movement and the Aziz Ansari story, but the issues that I discuss with Vanessa in this conversation are still totally relevant to those issues. Here's Vanessa Grigoriadis. You interviewed 120 students from 20 universities all over America. You spoke with nearly 80 administrators and experts and combed through dozens of case reports. You spoke to victims and perpetrators, the accused and the accusing, men who had been convicted and men who are still fighting to prove their innocence. And you spoke to many, many women. But the book starts with perhaps the most iconic person in this entire debate around sex, power and consent on campus, and that's Mattress Girl. Mm-hmm. Tell us, for those who aren't familiar with Mattress Girl, who is she and why is she so important?
So in 2014, a woman named Emma Solkowitz, who was dubbed Mattress Girl by the press, although she herself finds that, a really derogatory nickname. She was a student at Columbia University, which is one of the Ivy League, great universities we have in the U.S. in Manhattan. And she had brought a case to the campus court of Columbia and said, this boy sexually assaulted me. He was found to be innocent, and she was very upset about that. She was also an art student, and she came up with this project that was, lauded pretty much across the world, which was a performance art project. So she carried her own mattress from the Columbia dorms, which is about over 50 pounds, made of like a bed bug free material, over 6 feet long. She carried it around the Columbia campus, and she said she would continue carrying it for the rest of the year unless Columbia expelled the boy that she said assaulted her or until they graduated.
And, she was mentioned by Hillary Clinton. You did a very well-known cover story on her for New York Magazine. And she's since done a piece of performative art, would you call it? Taken her art project further with a video.
Yes. Hillary Clinton during the election said of Emma and her mattress, that image should haunt us all. I put her on the cover of New York Magazine. We called that cover, which was her and her mattress, a very different sexual revolution on campus. And it was about girls in college putting down their foot about sexual assault and rape in America. Columbia did not reopen her case, and she did carry that mattress to graduation. Right after graduation, she released a video. And in that video, she reenacted the sexual assault. She, composed a scene in a dorm room that looked very similar to the Columbia dorms, the actions of the actor and her. She played herself. They appear to be actually having sex. No Spanx on like celebrities or something like that. What she outlined was that, she and this boy who had hooked up before, hooked up during like an orientation period before, classes really started. And they, in this video and in what she says, they had oral sex and they had vaginal sex.
That was
But then
consensual.
was consensual. But then they progressed to anal sex, and that was not consensual. And she was hurt. And in the video, she says, ow. I think she even says stop. And, she portrayed that as a vicious, violent attack.
Which he disputes.
Which he disputes, yes. He alleges that nothing like that happened that night. Unfortunately, sexual assault is almost impossible to prove, right? So we have no idea what happened in that room on that night, like lots of other sexual assaults. I am really interested in this question of, was that sexual assault? So to me, what she describes is unquestionably sexual assault, right? You are permitted to not consent to any additional sex act,
Absolutely.
even if you had sex. And also anal sex, as we know, is not like, super comfortable. It's something that
is an acquired taste, perhaps.
Not only an acquired taste, but it requires somebody who is a bit experienced in the art of that, which he may or may not have been. So I think, what I do find very interesting, and part of what my book is about, is the fact that not all Americans and probably not all Australians and people around the world would call that sexual assault because consensual sex had already happened. Can consent be withdrawn? When should it be withdrawn? Did he need to ask her a question? Are you cool with this? Did they need to have a check-in before anal sex? I mean, I think before anal sex, yes, there has to be a check-in. I'm down with that. But
you can't just be, oops, I slipped.
Sure. Right. I slipped. Right? That's what the guys always say. I slipped.
Yeah. But then, Vanessa, that's interesting. We sort of have a wry chuckle about the oops, I've slipped and roll our eyes. But, that's something that's happened to most women. Is that sexual assault?
Okay. So in the U.S. at colleges, not elsewhere, a majority of U.S. colleges are now demanding that students receive consent for every successive sex act. So for every base, they want there to be consent, whether it's verbal or it's just some sort of moan or groan. Okay, you give me oral sex, but if I give you oral sex, we need to check in first, right? We need to check in even for reciprocal oral sex, that kind of idea. So the slipped question is a hard one, right? Because it's also possible that it's a slipped situation. I think, an easier question would be kind of the Julian Assange question of, if somebody has sex with you without a condom, is that sexual assault? Where that there was allegedly, in Julian Assange's case, an intent to have sex without the condom. Without intent, it becomes hard to call it sexual assault. But a lot of women know that there are guys who will have sex without a condom with, they'll kind of like just bypass that question or just do it anyway, or halfway through say, I have to take this off. I don't like it. You're putting the girl at risk there, and the girl doesn't want to be at risk.
What's different about the way uni students are having sex these days to, say, when, us Gen Xers were in our teens and early 20s?
Yeah, I think the difference really is that Gen Xers and boomers and university students today are all kind of having sex the same way, which is through online dating sites, with people they don't know very well, with people that they have a weird idea about because they've really studied and really penetrated that person online and been like, who is this person? So they come to the encounter with a lot of weird notions about if that person is very sexually experienced or not, or, you know, oh, well, I should go all the way with this guy because he's such a player. All the girls love him. He must be a great guy. You've just got all these weird ideas floating around your head because you've almost seen like an advertisement for their sexual availability on Instagram. So they're really part of that, you know, hook up culture, right? Which is not why sexual assault happens. I don't come to this from a respectability politics perspective where I want to say, okay, sexual assault happens because girls hook up too much, you know, but you know, the hooking up with somebody you don't know very well is, you know, can lead to sexual assault. A lot of sexual assault happens between two people who don't know each other very well. It's true that a lot of times it happens when hooking up isn't even the intention, but it does happen after a party. It does happen after going to the bar. And it's a friend of a friend who kind of sees the girl who's really drunk at the party and starts to flirt with her because he knows she's not in her right mind. And she probably is looking at him as somebody who's safe because she's hanging with all her friends and he's just a fellow college student, when really that guy's no different than a stranger you meet on the street.
You talk about three factors that are characteristics in your book of modern universities and modern students that you say are deeply intertwined with this phenomenon of sexual assault. And we do have the same thing, or we have apparently the same thing in Australia. I don't know if you're aware, but last year the Australian Human Rights Commission conducted a national survey about sexual assault on campus in Australia called Change the Course, and they measured the experiences of over 30,000 students across all 39 universities in the country. So it was very extensive. And they found that 51% of students were sexually harassed on at least one occasion in 2016, and 21% of students were sexually harassed at university or claimed they were. And, you know, it said that a woman in a college was 4 times as likely to have been sexually assaulted at college than your average woman. Now, obviously, you know, you looked at similar statistics out of the US, and these factors that you talk about that are very specific to college life or university life, you say the first is partying, the second is social media, and the third is black and white views on moral issues that adults tend to see in more shades of grey. Is that right?
Well, okay, it's more complicated than that. I mean, I think those three were about, you know, what I was going to explore in the book. But look, this is what I see as the problem. What I see as the problem is that, you know, partying is usually on guys' terms. Guys figure out, you know, they're going to get the kegs, they're going to get the drugs, the party's going to be at their house. At least in the US, it's a lot like that, right? Not only that, but you know, part of why young women are so susceptible to sexual assault has to do with the fact that their bodies are valuable, because we all bow to the body of a 20-year-old woman, right? That's what we see everywhere as being the paragon of beauty and sexuality. But a much larger part of it is that they're in situations that are social with men who may be dangerous. And the fact is, as a Gen X mother of 2, I just don't go out very much.
Same.
Right? I mean, I'm like, you know, I'm ready to go to sleep. My head hits the pillow. I'm out. You know, I get to dress up and go to a dinner party once in a while. I get let out of the house, but that's about it. There's not a hell of a lot of opportunity there.
But
when you're a college student,
it's every night, right?
Right. It's many nights. You know, in the US, we have big problem with college, and all the experts agree this is a crazy bubble. People are going into way too much debt. They're going to college at 18 with no genuine academic interests, no idea of why they're there. The college classes have become easier and easier because the professors don't want to teach. They only want to research. A lot of them are adjuncts. They're making no money. So they're not teaching the kids very well. They're not pushing the kids. And so the kids are there in whatever random college town, with nothing going on. They have a hell of a lot of leisure time, no genuine academic interests, and they're being thrown into what are essentially dangerous situations, which is, a lot of just hanging out socially with boundaries pretty unclear, and a lot of guys who have been socialized in the really toxic masculine norms of particularly the US, which we do a great job of beaming out worldwide, which are, a guy always pushes as hard as he can because a woman always says no before she says yes because she really wants to say yes. If she's wearing a short skirt, she's a slut. If she's drunk, she's a slut. I'm in college now. I can't be a virgin anymore. I need to take home this girl. I need a high five from all my bros. I mean, I hate to sound like a, cliched kind of after school special TV show, but like, these are the genuine thoughts that are going through guys' heads. And this is what we need to sort out.
In your book, it's called Blurred Lines, and you talk to so many students, and there is such a spectrum of the experiences that either they describe or that are described or considered sexual assault. I want to ask you about a couple of those. First of all, Oliver.
Okay, so basically what happened was he was a virgin. He was 18 years old. He says he was a virgin. This is his version, right? Okay, so he says he was a virgin. He was 18. He liked a girl. They went out in a big group, the way that 18-year-olds do, went to a bar, went here, went there in this big herd of kids. And the two of them peeled off. They went to a restaurant. I said, oh, well, what did you have to drink at the restaurant? And he said, we're 18. We couldn't drink anything. We had milkshakes, So they have their milkshakes. They go back to her room or his room, and they're watching Moulin Rouge on television, and they started hooking up. He says he told her that he was a virgin. She said, do you have a condom? He went and he got a condom. He put it on, but he didn't get hard. He took it off. She gave him oral sex. He got hard. He then did not put the condom back on and had sex with her. And she left in a big hurry. And she ultimately brought him up on charges of sexual assault. So now we have a situation where we have a boy who was probably very excited to have sex, probably rolled on top of her without thinking about it, right? That's his defense. I mean, I don't need to say probably. That's what he told me. And yet we also have a girl who
feels that she was violated.
Right, she was violent, and she was, right? He came inside her. She was violated. And she was frightened because she's also 18. She doesn't want to get an STD. She doesn't want to be pregnant. She's scared. So how do we sort out a situation like that? That's, again, there's a lot of sexual assault that's happening that's a lot more clear-cut than that.
But they're the blurred lines that you talk about. And it's interesting in the book, you speak to a lot of, you speak to girls, you speak to guys. In many cases, and that's one of them, you only do get one side of the story. But what I wanted to ask you is that, can two things be true at once in some of these situations? That she thought that she was violated, but he thought that she wasn't, and both of those things are true.
I absolutely think that's the case. Yes, I do.
And how do you adjudicate that?
I don't think that's the case in all of the situations, right? But in this case, yes, I do think that that's possible. How do you adjudicate it? I mean, that's the big conversation that's going on in the U.S. right now. Betsy DeVos has said, I don't want to adjudicate it. I just don't want to. I don't want to deal with a situation like that. I don't want that boy thrown out of school. And I'm not interested in it. Like, bring me your violent cases and we'll talk about it. These kinds of cases, I'm not interested in. So, we kind of had a movement that was really interested in pushing the envelope and saying, if that girl was violated, then let's punish that boy. At least make an example out of him to show other boys, And now she's really trying to reel that back in. But I think what's much, much, much more likely are situations where, the boys are saying, I believed I had consent. And the girls are saying there is no possibility you had consent. And the girls are usually telling the truth. It's just that it's really hard for them to prove it, because there's very little physical evidence in a lot of sexual assaults. You can be sexually assaulted and have no evidence.
In her book, Lena Dunham talked about an experience at college, which she was uncomfortable defining as sexual assault at the time that she wrote it, or defining as rape. She was then sort of, I won't say coerced, but encouraged by people who read that and said that was rape. What happened to you was rape. How much of it is that this stuff has been happening since the dawn of time, and it's not that it's happening more, but women are now calling what perhaps women in our generation would have just dismissed as just stuff that happens. They now say, no, wait, that's sexual assault. They're calling out this abhorrent behaviour.
Right. So, in Lena's case, it wasn't when she wrote the book that somebody said you should call it rape. It was after the incident, in the days after the incident, her friend said that was rape. Look, there's no question that things that I called a creepy night, that maybe you and your friends did too.
Called a sleazy guy.
He's sleazy. He's weird. Stay away from him. Yuck. That has been given the label of sexual assaulter. That is definitely true. In Lena's case, she had sex with a guy who, the next day told her friend, or I guess they had a mutual friend, said, I was so drunk last night, I can't remember who I had sex with. And I remember I deep dicked that girl. So, she was hurt. Somebody deep dicked her, right? Like
What does that even mean?
I think it just had very physically powerful sex with her, right? Mm-hmm. He didn't even know who he had sex with the next day. And again, this is a tricky situation, right? Because there are people who will say, well, if he was in a blackout and he didn't know what he was doing, then is he responsible? And my kind of comeback for that is well, if you're in a blackout and you hit somebody with your car, you're still responsible, right? Of course. So I think that the role of personal responsibility here is vast. And I mean that particularly on the guy's side. They're the one with, for lack of a better word, the tool. They're the one who is in control of the physical anatomy that is penetrating somebody's body, right? So the responsibility lies with them. At the same time, in my book, I do say that I think women should be aware that, if they go into blackout states in rooms with guys they don't really know, they are in dangerous situations. They should learn a little bit of self-defense. We need to tell girls, if you get into a dangerous situation, you do not beg or plead or cry, because that is not getting you any place. You yell, you act assertively, you push the guy away, and you say no. You use whatever physical force that you can muster up, provided the person doesn't have a weapon, right? To get out of that situation. So, to me, there's lots of conversations here that need to happen to make everybody safer.
But you say that there's a real move away from self-defense courses and from women being told what they can do, because that is perceived to be putting the onus on women to not be raped rather than putting the onus on men not to rape.
Yeah, I mean, in the US, the big craze is something called bystander education, which is telling everybody, at the orientation, look, sexual assault happens. It's really bad. Everybody needs to be part of a ethical community here. We all need to protect each other. Be a good bystander. If you see
Mm.
something, say something, right? Like if you see like a bomb in the subway, if you see like just a bag sitting by itself in the subway, go get a police officer. So if you see a guy hitting on a girl and she's not speaking English and she can barely walk, make sure that that guy doesn't take that girl home, you
Mm.
know? Okay, that's a good idea. I definitely agree with everything that they're teaching. I just am not sure it's enough because a lot of sexual assault is just not that visible. It's not always like you can see what's about to happen.
Well, in a lot
Um,
of those cases, like with Emma Solkowitz and with Oliver, who you described, they happened within the confines of consensual sex initially.
mhm,
According
sure.
to those women, which brings me to
Yeah.
alcohol and you know what role it plays. You tread very cautiously in the book, but you don't shy away from discussing it. It's a fraught area to talk about, though, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to blame anybody. And I can sit here and talk about alcohol freely because I know that I don't victim blame, that I don't think a
Mm,
girl who's wearing a short skirt is
mm,
asking for it, that I don't think a girl who goes to a bar and speaks crassly and gets up on the bar and takes her top off is asking for it. I
mm-mm.
don't think anybody's asking for it. So, I feel completely fine having the conversation about alcohol. I do recognize that there are other people who will use that alcohol conversation to go down a road that I wouldn't want them to go down, which
Mm.
is, well, if she was drunk, what else was she doing? Did she text him dirty pictures earlier in the day? What exactly was she wearing that night? Like those kinds of questions, I see how they get linked in with
Yeah.
alcohol. But my point of view is just like, let's be practical here, Let's be practical. And as a practical matter, drinking in moderation is no problem. There's no evidence that that leads to an increased risk of sexual assault. But drinking to, 9 drinks, which is a ton of
Mm.
drinks for a young woman, um, 9 drinks does put you at an increased risk. 9 drinks, you're probably either passed out or on your way to passing out or have no ability to control yourself. And, this is like the Brock Turner case at Stanford. Like that woman was in a dangerous situation. She was at a frat party. Her friends and her sister had left. Brock Turner was running around grabbing girls and kissing them, and he spotted her. I mean, you could argue that in that situation, it's too bad one of the frat brothers didn't step in because in that situation, it was what I just described as bystander
Mm.
education working because he was visibly going up to girls in a party and trying to kiss them, and he found her as like the wounded antelope of the herd, and he did target her.
But thankfully, the bystanders did intervene in terms of those two students on the bikes that came
Like,
across her.
yes, right, right, exactly. So in that case, I mean, look, there's a lot of people who study this in the US who will say, the strangest thing about that case is that he got caught. And the strangest thing
Yeah.
about that case is not only was he caught, but when he went through the criminal justice system, what we need to concentrate on is not that he was punished only for 3 months, it's that he was punished at all. Because mostly these guys just get away with it. I mean,
Mm.
that's the reality. Like, beyond anything I write about in my book about like, well, how is consent really defined? And what are the semantics about like rape versus sexual assault? And how does a younger generation really define this? The fact is rapists get away with their crimes. Like that is a truth. So, I didn't write a book about that because, I mean, it's just like so obvious to me in some ways. And like John Krakauer already wrote Missoula. So I didn't feel like I needed to like go down that path again. But that's, that's the situation. And that's why a lot of young women are really angry. And I understand that.
The Brock Turner case, obviously, and you also write in heartbreaking detail about the Vanderbilt University case, which was quite horrific. But you talk about, you listen to so many stories, and you say most of the stories that you listen to, or a lot of them, you say that they're not deeply pathological sex crimes so much as immature ones. I found them strangely boring.
I would say what Brock Turner did was slightly pathological, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There was premeditation there. The Vanderbilt case is a little different. 4 football players took a girl who was completely passed out, and they basically used her body as a blow-up sex doll, right? They didn't penetrate her with their penises. There's a question if one of them did. But they played with her, and they stuck different fingers in orifices and things like that, and they took a lot of pictures. And at the time, they said they thought it was funny. They were laughing about it. I think a lot of the situations are a lot more like that than we think. This is about immaturity, and guys, particularly I'm talking about college, right? I'm talking about college assaults, not like assaults in the wider world.
Like grabbing a girl's boobs.
Right, like grabbing a girl's boobs, something like that. Like, all of the experiences that women have had where they've, gone out with some guy that they didn't even really want to go out with to the movies, and he's tried to stick his hand up her skirt, while sitting at the movie. And then how do you get out of that? And you're kind of like closing your legs and that kind of shit. Like that's the kind of stuff, what those Vanderbilt players did, where it's really, it's just about a deep belief that women's bodies are for them, right? That like women don't really control their own bodies, and guys get to touch those bodies whenever they want,
That definitely came across. You write that our culture tells boys that all girls want to sleep with them, but the girls themselves often don't feel the same way. And the tone that I picked up through so much of your book is the girls you talk to are very angry and defiant, and a lot of the boys are bewildered and scared because it's like they don't understand the difference between this self-objectification that a lot of girls on their Instagrams.
Oh, look, I think that's true. I think that there are some people who would say, no, they're just dyed-in-the-wool predators. Like, that's the whole story. Why are you trying to make this complicated, Vanessa? But, I interviewed a lot of boys who were accused, some of whom were punished and some of whom were not punished, some of whom I believed and some of whom I didn't believe. And, I, like a lot of other people who study this, believe that we're in this kind of time of transition. And there are those dyed-in-the-wool predators, and there are those guys whose minds you're never going to change because they're just too screwed up in the head. But there's a lot of other guys who are teachable. And those guys are the ones who are bewildered and they are scared, and they are watching the kind of resurgence of feminist thought, and particularly feminist thought about sexual assault and bodily autonomy, and the notion that you can't touch this just because my body, is used to sell a watch on a billboard or sell a car. Just because my body is an object in mass media doesn't mean that my body is also an object for you, right? So I think that it's true that if you grew up socialized in, kind of American style movies and pop culture, and now you've got a bunch of girls saying, oh, no, we don't really want you to touch us. We don't think those acts are consensual that are being portrayed in movies and such. Like, we have a whole different sexual standard that we want you to live up to. I can see how that can be confusing, and my attitude is just basically like, okay, get with the program, get with the program. This is what's happening now. And I think young men are starting to do that. And part of why they're starting to do that is because cool girls are demanding it.
Your book is a fairly terrifying read for the mother of sons. And you talk about that. You actually talk to some of the mums of the boys who've been accused of campus sexual assault. And, one of the mums says to you, there's a huge difference between lacking judgment when you're 18, 19, 20 years old and having an actual intent to harm. As mothers of sons, what can we do? Obviously, as mothers of daughters, we want to protect our daughters. What would you say the message should be to mothers of sons and mothers of daughters separately? What should we tell our children before they go off to university or before they go off to, just going out in the world?
Right. Well, I mean, I think for everybody, and I don't know if this is as much a problem in Australia, but for everybody, drinking really in moderation has to happen. Like, we have to figure out a way to get better drinking habits among the youth, because alcohol is a powerful drug, and people need to recognize that. I think also what I said before, which is just not everybody's your friend, there are people who do want to hurt you, and you need to be wary of those people, even if they're your classmates, and for guys, these kinds of group chats that a lot of guys are on, kind of text message chains that they're on with their guy friends, I think are a really bad idea. Because I think guys are really, there's a lot of peer pressure to get laid in those group chats at midnight. And the guy who isn't taking a girl home may really feel like he needs to kind of like impress his buddies. I think group chat in general is just way too much of a peer pressure cooker and needs to go for both sides here, for both girls and boys. And of course, boys are also sexually assaulted by boys. I think, the part that we haven't talked about, but is true, is that there are some, bad actors on the girls' side too. There are girls who are accusing boys. We do have some cases in the US where girls are, accusing boys and the boys are innocent. And this is, something that we can't pretend is not happening. And thereby for the boys, it doesn't even have to be an ethical issue of like, this is the way you need to have responsible sex with a partner. I think that's very important. But if it's hard to get that message across, the most important message to get across is you don't want this to happen to you. You don't want to be the guy who girls on campus have labeled as a sexual assaulter. How are you going to change your behavior? So, we already got to the part where you're ethical in the bedroom, right? Where you treat girls well in the bedroom, but protect yourself too. Say to yourself, there's bad actors in all scenes. People always, can get in there and can always be like, we had this kind of scandal over Rolling Stone's UVA story, like something like that. It doesn't happen very often. It's kind of like a lightning strike that a girl would make up a rape charge. That is really not happening often, but it could happen to you. How are you going to act so it doesn't? I think, honestly, in this arena, a little fear is not a bad thing.
For girls and boys.
For both sides, yeah. I really do think that. A little fear. You don't want to be that guy, and you don't want to be that girl. And the bewildering stuff, is hard. Like, I don't want people to be confused about sex. I want them to hear that, ethics and respect are the way that this has to happen from now on, and feel sexually confident. I do worry sometimes that, sexual confidence is being a bit destroyed by, all the talk about sexual assault, because I've had a lot of both girls and boys say to me that they're really frightened now during sex.
Well, we were frightened of AIDS. Remember how scary it was for Gen X when we started having sex?
Exactly. And, and there's some argument to be made that here, we have increased rates of STDs in the US because people aren't using protection as much. We don't have the hard data on that, but it seems like that's coming down the pike. And, if they're not using protection, then they need to ask, like, are you cool with this? Do you want to have sex? Because you and I both know that there are a lot of girls who won't say no, but they don't really want to say yes, And that's one thing if you're like an old married woman and you don't want to say yes to sex because they're like over it. It's another thing if you're like an 18-year-old girl who has had sex with one other guy previously and you're still verbally pressured, or you just feel like you're in the situation. You're like, I don't know. I don't want to be a prude. I want to other girls do this. I guess I should have sex with him. I want him to be happy. He says he has blue balls, that's all not cool. That's not cool. That question should be asked so a girl can say yes or no. A verbal question I think is great.
Yeah, and the blurred lines around coercion as opposed to just physically overpowering someone. There's also emotional manipulation, isn't there?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much pressuring that goes on.
Vanessa, congratulations on the book. It is fantastic. It has just opened my mind in a real generational way because, as you mentioned so many times, there is a real divide between the way Gen X and Boomers perhaps look at this and the reality of what millennials are experiencing, both girls and boys.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate that.
Thanks so much. And I look forward to reading everything. I follow your byline religiously, so I will continue to stalk you online.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vanessa. See ya.
Take
Bye.
care.
Thanks for downloading No Filter. You can find Vanessa's book, Blurred Lines, which I really loved. It was so interesting. Even though it was about consent on American college campuses, it just pretty much rang true for me of all university campuses or kind of situations where you have a lot of young men and women together. I sound so old. Young men and women, the young folk. You can find Vanessa's book at apple.co/Mamamia, which is where you can find all the books by the people that we interview. If you scroll back through the feed, you can find more interviews. We're getting so much feedback from people who've just discovered No Filter and are enjoying the fact that there are over 100 of these in-depth conversations to listen to with people, and they haven't dated. People like celebrity doctor Anne Helen Peterson and my personal guru, Elizabeth Gilbert. No Filter is produced by Eliza Ratliff. I am Mia Friedman. You can find me on Instagram at Mia Friedman, and you can also find everything we do here at Mamamia at the homepage mamamia.com.au.